Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Taiwan Chinese conflict. Obviously, China has stated ambitions of taking control of the fully independent island nation of Taiwan. Now, we have seen recent military operations, training exercises by the Chinese directed towards Taiwan. Now, specifically, this training exercise, Operation Joint Sword, was conducted with approximately a dozen or so Chinese warships, including an aircraft carrier, and about 90 to 100 aircraft. What was unique about Operation Joint Sword was some of the verbiage, some of the statements coming out of the Chinese side. The Chinese, after completion of Operation Joint Sword, specifically stated that they were practicing the targeting of locales on the island nation of Taiwan. I don't believe that China has ever said that before. So when they launched these 90 aircraft, including operations with their newest aircraft carrier, which took place on the eastern side of the island, and I'll talk about that here in a second as well. But they talked about hitting targets on the island. They talked about going after the Taiwanese Air Force, the Taiwanese Navy, and then obviously targets on the ground in Taiwan. Now, as I just talked about, they also used a carrier on the eastern side of the island. And if we look at this Operation Joint Sword, if we look at prior operations, it does appear that the Chinese are not necessarily looking to conduct an amphibious operation against Taiwan. They're looking at a blockade. And it's becoming more and more apparent that that's the military goal at this point. It looks like the military operations that are on the table for the Chinese is, one, to eliminate the Taiwanese Air Force, the Republic of China Air Force, the elimination of the Republic of China or the Taiwanese Navy, and the degrading of the air defense, command and control, and supply nodes on the island itself, while at the same time conducting a successful blockade of Taiwan. They may go after these islands here, Pengao, and some of the other islands just off the coast of China proper. But it looks like that the Chinese are not actively preparing for an amphibious landing on the main island. Again, it looks like they're preparing for some sort of blockade. Now, they did position a carrier off the eastern coast of Taiwan. Now, a lot of analysts are saying, well, that doesn't look good for Taiwan because the Chinese are going to attack the eastern coast of Taiwan. And many analysts envision that the Taiwan Air Force will have to operate from the eastern side of the island against Chinese aircraft and ships, as the many of the airfields on the western coast would be destroyed. Now, I don't believe that we will see China, in the event of armed conflict, move a carrier battle group to the eastern side of Taiwan. And if it does, it's going to be well out of range of the Taiwanese Air Force and the ability of Taiwan to target that aircraft carrier. That is also going to cause issue for those strike aircraft on board that aircraft carrier to target Taiwan. I think the move of having that aircraft carrier, especially on Operation Joint Sword that we just saw, is simply a PR stunt. The Chinese are showing, look, we've got the capability of positioning a carrier off the East Coast. Now, does that mean that they're going to do that in the event of a blockade? Possibly, but that would come later. That would come after the Chinese have successfully defeated the Taiwanese Air Force and sunk the Taiwanese Navy. Putting a Chinese carrier off the east coast of Taiwan without destroying the Taiwanese Air Force is going to put that carrier at great risk. And then compounding that is another significant issue for the Chinese. And that's if the United States becomes involved in the conflict, which it undoubtedly will. The United States cannot afford to have the Chinese take control of the world chip sector. Can't do it. Cannot do it. It's many, Taiwan is many times more strategic for the United States' interests than Ukraine. Many times more. So an aircraft carrier operating off the east coast of Taiwan would give the U.S. a very ripe, plump target for American nuclear attack boats, submarines. If the Chinese put an aircraft carrier off the eastern coast of Taiwan, that aircraft carrier is as good as sunk by a U.S. nuclear attack sub. Absolutely. In all probability, I think the Chinese will move some of its more its aircraft carrier assets closer to China. I don't think the Chinese will deploy those carriers initially, or possibly at all, in areas where the U.S. nuclear submarines could sink them. And again, I think the Chinese are going to be relying on its ballistic missiles, it's going to be relying on its massive drone fleet, and it's going to be mainly relying on its land-based air force to enforce that blockade. If the Chinese are able to effectively mitigate the Taiwanese Air Force, take the Taiwanese Air Force out of the equation, which is going to be tough, then the Chinese will be able to enforce an economic exclusion zone, a blockade of Taiwan with long-range bombers, fighter bombers, it's J-20 stealth fighters, and smaller naval assets. So it looks like, again, right now, the Chinese are preparing and positioning itself for a blockade-type operation that also includes the destruction of the Taiwanese Air Force, its Navy, and then targeting other high-value targets on the island itself. Now, the real question is then what is Taiwan going to do and what is the United States going to do? And ultimately, if the United States gets involved, especially of just deploying its nuclear attack subs, it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese to maintain a blockade of Taiwan. And then ultimately, will the Chinese be successful in destroying the Chinese air or the Taiwanese Air Force? We don't know that answer yet. We don't know how effective the Chinese ballistic missile strikes are going to be. We don't know how effective the Chinese drone campaign and land-based Air Force strikes against targets in Taiwan is going to be. We just don't have that answer yet. I would say that this is absolute. Do not write off Taiwan's Air Force. It is a very advanced Air Force. It's very well trained with very good pilots. But ultimately, until the bullets start flying, we really don't know what things are going to look like. But again, I stick to my contention that the Chinese don't have the capability of landing an amphibious force on Taiwan and seizing control of the island with ground forces. The Chinese aren't there yet, don't have that capability, and it's highly likely the Chinese would be defeated on the ground while trying to land on Taiwan. Now, a blockade, the destruction of the Taiwanese Air Force and Navy, that is a more reasonable ask of the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, at this point. So Joint Sword is complete. Again, the Chinese look to be positioning themselves for a blockade and an attack against the Taiwanese Air Force, Navy. But outside of that, that's about as far as China will be able to go at this point. More to come. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.